at Audible and Amazon as well, I mean, we look for QA engineers who are basically developers with a strong passion for quality. A unique thing about quality assurance space is that it does provide opportunities for people who might not necessarily have like all of those checked off. Like I have some really good examples where people from non-technical backgrounds were able to join the team and be successful. One example is when I joined Audible, the recruiter who called me actually and who ended up recruiting me into Audible, a year later ended up joining my team.
Before we move on, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button and bell icon to receive a notification for a new podcast every Tuesday and career tips every Friday as soon as it is published. And now, let's get to the guest introduction. Quality assurance is the career up for discussion on today's podcast. Our guest today started off a journey at leading investment banks such as UBS and Morgan Stanley as an automation engineer. She currently is a senior director of quality assurance at Audible, an Amazon company, and is helping to build a quality assurance team to support innovative product development at scale. She's also the founder of the DevOps and Quality Assurance New Jersey Meetup Group, a co-led of Women in Tech Employee Resource Group at Audible, and is an international speaker on the topics of quality assurance and DevOps. It is my pleasure to introduce Tanya Kravtsov on today's podcast and discuss with her the journey of her job. You are listening to The Career Show, a podcast that helps you find the right career and inspires you to follow your passion. My name is Trishant Pansrajani, and I'm a student seeking answers to career-based questions that we all have. I'm here to sit down with career specialists and talk to them about the lessons learned during the journey of their career. Hi Tanya, welcome on to the Career Show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm doing great. I'm very happy to be here.
One of the main goals of the podcast is to bring to light careers in niche industries. So, what I mean by that is, for example, when one thinks about investment banking, they only think about business and finance roles. One never really thinks about tech roles in the finance industry. And since you started off your QA engineer, that's quality assurance journey in the finance industry, I think that's a great place to start off. So, do you want to talk about that?
Sure, I'll be happy to share. So my first job out of college was in UBS, which at that time was called Payne Weber. So I spent 5 years in Payne Weber, and then I worked another 5 years in Morgan Stanley. So yes, like I think majority of my career initially was spent in the financial field. So definitely, finance and investment banking is not just about the business, right? There is a lot of technology driving that business, both internal and customer facing. And there are a lot of different roles involved in that. So my area of expertise is quality assurance. So I started out as a quality assurance engineer working at Payne Weber. And then I moved into performance testing and automation, which was much closer to my educational background as I'm a computer science graduate. So I was very happy to get my hands again on technology. And I continued my career in that automation and performance space.
Super cool. That sounds like an amazing start to your journey. But after 10 amazing years at UBS and Morgan Stanley, you decided to move to the tech industry. So now let's talk about how that experience was for you and how different was it to work as a quality assurance engineer at a finance industry compared to a technology industry company?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did like learning more about finance and working in that area. However, at the same time, I felt that we were too far removed from the customer. And as someone who is very focused on quality and end product, you do want to be close to the customer and you do want to have a deep passion for the products that you're working with. So I think that's when I realized that my next step in the career should be in the technology space where we would be the business basically, right? So I moved to an ETL company whose main product was around big data and data analytics and ETL. And I found that very interesting. It was a brand new space for me. And that was also the first time I got into a management role where I was hired to basically build out a QA team from scratch. So that was a very exciting space. And then now I'm working at Audible, where I'm actually a user of the product that I'm helping to build and develop. And I think that's the optimal space for me. And I think it's different for every person, right? Someone loves finance and they're heavy users of financial applications and they have a lot of passion for it. I love working on the products that I can use myself, product like entertainment product like Audible. So this is really where I found my niche.
You mentioned a lot of interesting things which raised plenty of follow-up questions in my head. So I'll take them one by one. First, you mentioned that it is important to understand the user when you're a QA engineer. So how does one approach understanding their clients?
So at Audible and Amazon, customer obsession is one of our top principles, and it's definitely a foundation behind quality management as well. So I think understanding the customer, being able to take customer point of view, whether you build, design, or test the product, is critical to being successful. And then having an ability to convert those customer needs into requirements and use cases, I would say like that's an art form in itself, right? Because generally like a client knows what they need, but they might not necessarily give you every single detail as far as the edge cases and what shouldn't work. Like they know what should work, right? So they have the positive scenarios and you need to fill in all the blanks. So I think a big part of how to be successful in that is understanding in and outs of the product that you're working on, right? Like if you know the product, if you yourself use the product and you know everything about it, then it's going to be much easier to understand when something breaks. And also in QA area, you want to find issues before customer finds them, right? So you really need to have that customer hat on at all times. So I would say product understanding, reading customer feedback is critical. Right now we have access to all the social media, right? Like we have access to Reddit and Twitter and Facebook, and customers in many cases write what they think about your product. And you shouldn't just wait for customers to call customer support. In many cases, it makes sense to go and see what are people saying on social media, and you actually might find some really great insights there as well. And then in addition, depending on the company, but doing targeted user research where you actually bring a group of customers in and you let them try your product or try features before they come out has been extremely helpful as well, and helps you maybe identify some requirements that you might not even think about. So all of those together, I think, will help you build a very, very good product.
Quality assurance engineers are like back-end magicians, right? You do not hear about them, but they're so important. I'm so happy to learn about them. But you're currently working at Audible, which is an Amazon company. So how is your experience at Amazon as a QA director? But more importantly, what kind of an experience does a new graduate have when he or she joins the Audible team in quality assurance?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, so when I joined Audible 5 years ago, I was a team of one, and now we're a 50 plus person group. So it's been a great journey, and every person that I'm working with right now in QA like has joined since I got there. So it's definitely been a great experience. And I've done a lot of hiring, a lot of mentoring. So I can definitely help to answer the question as far as like what type of skill set is required for a new QA engineer and what kind of educational background. So again, this might be different from company to company, but at Audible and Amazon as well, I mean, we look for QA engineers who are basically developers with a strong passion for quality, right? So we do look for people with bachelor's degree in computer science or related fields like engineering, applied math, and so forth. There needs to be some fundamentals in computer science, of course, curiosity, innovation, passion for software testing, as well as really, really good spoken and written communication skills. I'm sure it's important everywhere, but if you're QA engineer, you constantly have to talk to people. You are basically a middleman between engineering and product and customers, right? Like, so the way you document your test strategy, test plans, and the way you document issues that you find can make, can be a decisive factor between how fast the issues are addressed or how well requirements implemented. So those would be the requirements. However, I do want to say that a unique thing about quality assurance space is that it does provide opportunities for people who might not necessarily have like all of those checked off. Like I have some really good examples where people from non-technical backgrounds were able to join the team and be successful. One example is when I joined Audible, the recruiter who called me actually and who ended up recruiting me into Audible, a year later ended up joining my team.
Wow.
I had one open role remaining on the team, and he reached out and said, listen, I always wanted to do tech. I have some technical background, but he's been doing recruiting for many years. And he joined the team. And what he brought to the team was ability to communicate across the organization. He knew so many people in the org because he actually recruited them. So whenever we had an issue, he was always the one who knew exactly who to reach out to. And then he also just had this really like big passion for learning and gaining technical skills. So he was very successful.
Yeah, I completely agree with you because technical skills can always be developed over time, but having those soft skills and mainly that passion and willingness to learn is so important. And so great to hear about that story. But you said that when you joined Audible, you were a team of one. You are now a director, but when you started off 10 years ago, you were just a new graduate in quality assurance. So, how has your role changed as you've gone up the ranks? How have you included your leadership skills within the technical side of the business?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, so it's definitely been quite a journey. As I said, like I started out as a manual QA tester and then evolved in my technical career. And I mean, that would generally be my suggestion. Leadership is great. And I know a lot of people are aspiring to be a leader and grow in their career. But one thing that I strongly believe is that you have to become an expert in what you do, and you have to be a role model for people that you manage before you start managing. And I think that's what I've done. I spent, many years developing my QA and technical skills, and I went from doing just basic testing to developing frameworks. And I think somehow naturally that got noticed by my managers who started giving me some opportunities. But at the end, it's really you who have to grab those opportunities. So I think what was a big push for me was when I worked in Morgan Stanley and we had the merger with Smith Barney. We had this 2-year-long project where we needed to do a lot of consolidation between different systems. And I was offered an opportunity to lead those contractors. So it wasn't a management role. I was still an engineer, but I got to interview people, hire people, mentor people, lead them, put projects. And that really gave me the skills necessary to decide for myself whether or not I want to get into the leadership role.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I continued to contribute to our code bases and test plans and engineering work. So that was really my push. And I think that's what led me to take that next leap and join SyncSort, where I got an opportunity to join as a manager building a new QA team. So that definitely helped to develop those initial skills, but then building the team from scratch, I think, is really a different experience where you start gradually leading people that you're working with. So there it wasn't just about managing people, but it was about defining strategy and working with other leaders across the company to understand their pain points and see how your team can contribute to it. So that was a really great experience. And then I think the next push, I would say, not necessarily management related, but my manager at SyncSort came to me at some point and said, well, since you're a leader here, you should look at the opportunities to do public speaking. Just said, like, you have a lot of ideas, you have things to share, like you should really consider going out there and sharing it with wider audience. And that's not anything I ever even considered doing. So I definitely wouldn't be the one going out and talking in front of hundreds of people. But I think that pushed me to take that leap. And I did a 5-minute lightning talk. And people came up to me afterwards and told me that it was a good talk and they enjoyed it. And I think that changed my mindset in that area. So I realized that it's not just about you managing a group of people within the company, but it's also about you becoming a thought leader, right? Like, you want to share what you believe worked and doesn't work, and you want to learn from other people as well. So that's when I also started going to conferences and sharing my ideas about automation and DevOps and agile transformation. I also created my own meetup group in my area focused around DevOps. And every month we would have speakers come in and share things about the tools. So for me, it was also, I would say, leadership development, because reaching out to speakers from different companies, bringing people in, that also takes some skills that you might not necessarily use when you're working as a manager within a group. But I learned so much from that experience, both from the organizer perspective, but also from an attendee perspective. I got to listen to really great speakers, and I learned a lot about tools.
That is such an inspirational journey. You have learned so much on the way, and it is so helpful for me to grasp all that knowledge right now. But I'm sure when you have such an incredible journey, there are some challenges that you face in the way. So I want to ask you, what has been one of the biggest challenges for you during your quality assurance career? And how did you deal with it? And how did it help you reach where you are?
It's hard to focus on one challenge. I mean, I think being in a technology space and in quality assurance space, I mean, there are definitely many challenges. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is, since my focus has always been automation and DevOps, these are areas that you constantly have to sell to teams, to leadership, and convince them to invest into it or convince them to adopt it. So that's been one of the continuous challenges, right? Because testing is something that can be done manually by throwing more people at it. And some companies go in that direction. But me having the background in technology and having an understanding of what technology can do to make your life simpler, right? Like, I always try to find the ways to eliminate the manual bottlenecks and automate wherever it can be automated. So I was a very strong believer in that. So I think one of the challenges, which also helped me to grow, was constantly having to prove and demonstrate the value of what I do and what my team is doing. I think also a big thing that happened during my career was shift from waterfall to agile. Right? Like when I started working in financial industry, I was part of this traditional waterfall model where development spent months and months writing code, and then they send it over to our QA team, and we would spend another several months testing it, and then finally we would give it to operations and then production. And then now I'm working in a completely different world where we are trying to release something on daily, weekly basis, and quality needs to be engineered into that process, right? So I think that was another big challenge that also impacted my career and things that I needed to learn along the way. But again, I thought that if anything, it helped me to grow and learn. And then finally, I would say, as a QA engineer, something that you will realize along the way is that no matter what you do, you will still miss some bugs, right? And that has been also that's been a big challenge, because you're by nature a perfectionist. You want things to be perfect. You want the product to be perfect quality, but that's never the case, because you always have to do trade-offs, right? Like if you want customer to get the feature fast, then you have to decide what you can test and what you cannot test. And that means there is always a risk of something getting missed. And I think the most important thing that I learned is that any issue that you miss is a learning opportunity. You figure out why you missed it, you improve that, and keep on going. And hopefully over a period of time, it's just going to continue improving your process. So those are some examples. I'm sure there are a lot more, but I'll stop there for now.
You spoke about manual testing and automation testing, which is the perfect cue in for our newest section in the podcast called Got Career Questions, in partnership with Sizigi, wherein a couple of Sizigi users sent in questions for you, and they want you to answer their questions in relation to QA engineering. So I hope you're excited for it.
Yes, very much.
So the first question actually is, how much time does a new graduate spend on automation testing compared to manual testing?
Looking at our current team, I think the goal is always spend at least half of their time on automation. And then the other portion, it's not just automation versus manual, right? QA engineer does a lot more than just run tests. There is a lot of time spent on strategy and planning, right? And in many cases, that could be a majority of your activities, just figuring out how you're going to test and what you need to test. And then there is the execution portion of it. So I would say ideal case scenario is that you spend probably 50% of your time on actually strategizing and planning. And then whatever you can automate from that plan, you should automate. And then the remainder will be your manual testing. Right? So it's not one versus the other, really. You have to test ideal case scenarios that you automate as much as possible. So I don't know, it doesn't really answer the question. I would say best case scenario, you spend twice as much time on automation than you do manual testing.
I'm sure that answers the question. And this is something that I want to ask you just in follow-up to your answer. And that is, what different teams does a QA engineer work with? You spoke about this earlier as well. A QA engineer would work with products, will focus on clients. So what are the different teams within the company itself does a QA engineer work with?
Yeah, I would say pretty much everybody. So of course, like our main partner would be the development team, right? We need to work side by side with development, to give feedback to them and to learn from them as far as what changes are being made in the code. Of course, product, like all the requirements and everything, test case reviews happen with the product team. At Audible today, we are closely partnering with marketing teams as well, right? Because marketing continuously releases marketing campaigns, which also have to be validated, right? So there needs to be awareness from both sides. Customer support is a big partner, right? Because customer support is closest to the customer. So we've been collaborating a lot with the customer support team, sharing what we do with them, and then learning about any customer issues from them. And then in addition, our UX team, we've been partnering closely on accessibility. So accessibility has been a big focus in the recent years, making sure that our products are not only functional, but also accessible. And that's where, again, you need to work across the whole organization, and not just the technology part of that. So these are just few of the examples, but really, as I mentioned, in this agile delivery world, quality really has to be embedded everywhere, right? So I would say in best case scenario, QA engineers are working with teams like throughout the entire life cycle, starting from ideation and until the delivery.
Super cool. So now let's move on to the second question sent in, and that is, what tips, if you could give them any tips to prepare for a quality assurance engineering interview? I know you mentioned that technical skills can be learned on the job. So I want to ask you, like, keeping in mind that it's a person who does not have a lot of technical background, how does he or she prepare for this interview?
And if I'm looking at the way that we've been interviewing at Audible and even in my previous companies, technical interview is definitely part of it. So if someone doesn't have a lot of technical background, they should probably still brush up on any skills that they have related to coding, scripting, data structures, object-oriented design, because we do touch upon those concepts when we do interviews. There are some great books that I can recommend that could help people prepare, even if maybe they don't necessarily remember all of this or they haven't learned. Outside of coding and problem solving, they need to be ready with examples for the open-ended discussions. So a lot of questions that get asked during interview would be in the form of, give me an example when you did this, which demonstrated that, right? So ideal case scenario, you come to an interview having those examples in mind. Think about if you're interviewing for a QA engineer position, you might want to look back to examples where you found a very critical bug and what did you do about that. Think about examples where you collaborated with different teams to get the customer problem solved. Think about examples that demonstrate how customer obsessed you are, right? All of those things are very important, and they can help to offset potentially, if you might not have as much technical background as necessary. If you can demonstrate your passion for quality and customer obsession, that's very important. And then, of course, core testing skills, like being able to come up with a test plan or design test cases. They don't teach you that in college, right? This is something that people should just think about. If you have a vending machine and you need to test that it works, what do you do? Do you just test that a Coca-Cola bottle comes out, or should you also test what happens if you put a foreign currency in it? Or so think about how would you break it, not just how to test that it works, right? And those type of things demonstrate your quality mindset as well. So these are a few examples. I hope that answers the question. And like I said, I'll be happy to share some reading material that could help people as well.
I was actually going to just follow up on that. Do you have any books on the top of your mind that you would like to recommend to our listeners?
So one book that I specifically liked, if I need to brush up on coding questions, is the Cracking the Coding interview. I have it on my desk. I think it's a really good book to just refresh yourself on all these different topics. In software testing, there is a great book which is called Lessons Learned in Software Testing. I really enjoyed reading that book. And another book which is not really related to either one, but I think it gives you a really good concept of the whole life cycle and possible improvements that you can make is the Phoenix Project. It's one of my favorite books, and it really inspired me to look more into DevOps and make me realize that automation is not just about testing, it's about automating any manual bottlenecks that you have in your process. So the Phoenix Project, cracking the coding interview, and lessons learned in software testing would be some of my recommendations.
I'll keep in mind to attach the links to those books in the description below. And the last question that we got in was in regards to, is quality assurance a fast-paced environment? And if yes, how to keep up with it?
Yes, I will say it's just like anything I think technology related right now, right? Technology is always changing, and you need to keep up with that. And in quality assurance space, there's been a lot of evolution, both from process and tooling perspective. And you need to continuously reevaluate what you're doing and the tools that you're using, and be aware of things that might be out there that could be better and faster. Um, I mentioned it already, but I think it's crucial to learn from every bug that was missed, because that's where you really find opportunities for improvement. Also, any failed automation script, right, like helps you to figure out how to make your automation frameworks better and more robust. Also, any communication gap failures, right? Like usually we think when we think about lessons learned, we're thinking about functional issues, but what about communication issues? Like what is the reason that this team didn't know about this feature coming in? This might be a process gap that you can help to fix. So all of those things help you to keep up with this fast-paced environment. And then just constantly learning, like I mentioned, my meetup. I think in general, like meetups, conferences, reading things on LinkedIn and Reddit, like being aware of what's out there, what are other teams doing that helps to solve similar problems to what you're having. I think these are all the things that can help you to stay on top of all these changes and ahead of it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for answering that. And that was our Got Career questions in partnership with Sizigi. And now I want to ask you my traditional last question of the podcast. And that is, what is one advice you wish you had received when you were starting off your journey as a QA engineer?
Yeah, that's a great
I
question.
usually get that sigh when I ask that question.
Yeah, the difficulty is one, right? Because I can think of so many things that I learned since I first graduated school and started working. So it's very hard to pick one that was the most impactful. I think one thing that comes to mind, which can probably apply to anyone, whether you're an engineer or a senior leader, if you get stuck somewhere, and you will get stuck at one point or the other, try to unblock yourself, obviously, but don't be afraid to ask for help in order to move forward. I think that was a big thing. And I think when you're more junior, you have a mindset that if you're stuck, you're embarrassed to let someone know because you think that everyone expects you to figure it out on your own. But what I've seen is that people who become more successful are the ones who realize the point where you should reach out, and that actually shows your maturity and your leadership skills. The fact that you can admit that I don't know this, and you also know the right people that you can ask. And a couple of I think quotes that come to mind. I was at a conference 2 years ago, and someone said that really I think resonated with me, was if you do not ask for help, you're definitely not going to get it. But if you do ask for help, there is a 50-50 chance that someone will respond, right? And I think that's really really, really important and demonstrates my point. And I'm a big fan of quotes in general. And then another quote that I just want to mention, which I love, is by Martin Luther King. And he said, if you cannot fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. And that's, I think, the point I'm trying to make. It's all about moving forward, whether it's learning, your career journey, like might be something within your family, but always find a way to unblock yourself and don't be afraid to ask for help.
I think those are two great quotes to end on. And I think it is super important, like you said, to keep moving and always keep hustling and always asking for help. Because like you said, you either get it or you don't, but it's always better to ask. And on that note, thank you so much, Tanya, for coming onto the show and sharing your journey. I personally have learned a lot, and I'm sure the listeners are going to benefit as well. So thank you once again.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this week's career discussion. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means a lot.